Happy New Year, everyone. Today is the first session for the DBMI Monday seminar of 2021. Here's to a wonderful year and many more. Today we have a great speaker, Dr. Terika McCall, who's going to present her talk, mHealth for Mental Health, User-Centered Design and Usability Testing of a Mental Health Application to Support Management of Anxiety and Depression in African American Women. Dr. McCall is a National Library of Medicine Biomedical Informatics and Data Science postdoctoral fellow at Yale's Center for Medical Informatics. Her research focuses on reducing disparities in mental health service utilization through use of technology. Dr. McCall's research is interdisciplinary and focuses on issues related to the acceptance, design, development, and use of mHealth applications for mental wellness. And with that, I'm going to hand the baton to Dr. McCall. Thank you so much for presenting.
Thank you, Harry, for that introduction. And thank you everyone for joining me today for this talk. I'm going to go ahead and share my slides. All right. There we go. So today I'll present my research study on user-centered design and usability testing of a mental health application to support management of anxiety and depression in African American women. I will begin by briefly discussing the background and purpose of the study. Then I will present the methods and results of both the focus group and usability testing. I will then conclude with the important takeaways from the findings and proposed future directions for the study. So let's start with a little background. Approximately 1 in 5 African American women experience mental illness in the past year. The prevalence of mental illness among African American women is comparable to the general population. However, they use mental health services at less than half the rate of their white counterparts. Anxiety and depression are 2 of the most common mental illnesses, with approximately 16% of non-Hispanic Black women reporting having generalized anxiety in their lifetime, and around 27% reporting experiencing depression in their lifetime. Furthermore, approximately 70% of African American women that reported experiencing mental illness in the last year did not receive any mental health treatment during that time. Historically, barriers such as stigma of mental illness, less access to treatment, lack of or inadequate health insurance, diminished access to a provider who shares their sociocultural background, mistrust of providers, and low health literacy all prevent traditionally marginalized populations for seeking care. A recent survey that I conducted revealed that the most common reasons African American women do not seek mental health treatment or counseling when needed included costs, not knowing where to access services, lack of time, and stigma from others knowing they are utilizing mental health services. So the use of health information technology, including mobile apps to deliver mental health services, may actually help to diminish some of these barriers by providing information about how to access affordable services and offer a discreet way to receive care in a preferred setting, such as their home. So results from that same survey show that younger respondents were more likely to answer yes to the question, would having the option to use a mobile app to complete an appointment with a professional increase your access to mental health services? Results show that 75% of the younger group, those that were under 50, actually said yes to this, as opposed to approximately 50% of the older group. Similarly, younger respondents were more likely to answer yes to the question, would having the option to use a mobile app to complete an appointment save you time traveling to a professional's office? And results show that approximately 82% of the younger group, compared to approximately 57% of the older group, said yes to this question. Also, younger respondents were more likely to answer yes to the question, would having the option to use a mobile app to complete an appointment with a professional be more convenient for you than an in-person appointment? And results showed that 65% of the younger group, compared to approximately 43% of the older group, also said yes to this. And so this data was actually collected pre-COVID pandemic. So I would hypothesize that with the boom in telehealth use, the percentage of those who would agree with this question would be higher if it was asked today. So in the past, randomized controlled trials exploring the use of smartphone mental health interventions to reduce anxiety or depressive symptoms revealed that participants experienced significant reduction in anxiety or depressive symptoms post-intervention. However, the majority of published studies were conducted with predominantly white participants, which may affect the generalizability of the results to other racial and ethnic groups. Previous studies also showed that African American women are comfortable with participating in mHealth research and interventions, and 80% of African American women own smartphones. This presents a great opportunity to use apps to help reduce the disparity in utilization of mental health services and improve health outcomes for this population. However, a study by Sarkar and colleagues, which investigated the usability of commercially available mobile applications for depression, found that while participants expressed interest in using technology for self-management, current tools are not consistently usable for diverse patients. So the purpose of the study was to determine what content, features, and considerations should be included in an app tailored to help African American women manage anxiety and depression, and to evaluate the usability of the app. This was accomplished through conducting focus groups and usability testing sessions with African American women in Durham and Chapel Hill, North Carolina. So I'll now speak about the focus groups. The focus groups were held at a Durham County library and at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in January of last year. Women 18 years or older who identified as Black, African American, or multiracial, Black, African American, and another race were eligible to participate in the study. Participants were recruited via a web-based survey that was launched prior to the focus groups, as well as postings on social media sites, including Facebook and Twitter. I also used flyers posted at public locations in the Durham and Chapel Hill areas. Participants received a $25 Amazon gift card and a mental health information sheet for their participation in the study. So the topics of the focus group discussion included topics such as past and current causes of anxiety and depression and coping skills used, attitudes and perceptions towards mental illness and receiving mental health treatment, content and features needed in a smartphone app designed to help African American women manage anxiety and depression, and barriers and facilitators to the use of a smartphone app for mental health care. So these sessions were actually audio recorded and transcribed verbatim, and Vivo 12 software was used to conduct thematic analysis, and focus group transcripts were analyzed to reveal the themes related to the preferences and concerns with a mental health app. Reoccurring themes across the focus groups were also noted. So now I'll dive into the results by first discussing the characteristics of the focus group participants. So 20 women attended one of the 4 focus group sessions, and each group consisted of 5 participants. All participants identified as Black, African American, or multiracial, and the study participants range in age from 21 to 79 years old, with a mean age of 36.6 years old. And also 75% of the participants were less than 50 years old. So the focus group participants shared that in the past, they primarily used mental health and wellness apps that had features for meditation, mood tracking, calorie intake and activity monitoring, and deep breathing exercises. In addition, the use of music apps and listening to podcasts were popular. Inspirational messages on social media apps were also mentioned as being beneficial to mental wellness. So the recommendations from the focus group participants focused on the type of content and features that should be included in the app, as well as suggestions to increase app usage and establish trust with the users. So here's a snapshot of the user-centered recommendations And I'll now take a few minutes to discuss them in more detail and share a few quotes from participants. So many suggestions were given on the content that should be included in an app designed to help African American women manage anxiety and depression. Recommendations were either informational or inspirational. For example, participants stated they would like information about how to find a Black woman therapist in their area, guidance on how to deal with common stressors such as microaggressions and imposter syndrome, and information about events in the area to connect with other Black women. Inspirational messages and encouraging stories about how others overcame adversity were also desired. And participants also recommended having positive and supportive messages in the app and suggested readings that promote mental wellness. So regarding information to find a therapist, a participant voiced she would like to be able to find Black women therapists in the area, with also listing what insurances they take, their hours, all that good stuff. Because again, those barriers, people are just like, where are these people? The recommended app features allowed users to monitor their progress, practice coping techniques, and connect with others. For example, participants suggested that the app have features to track anxiety, depression, and mood. In addition, they recommended guided meditation, deep breathing, and other coping techniques narrated by a Black woman. Participants stated that most meditation apps use a British or Australian voice to narrate. However, they desired to hear what they described as a Black auntie voice. In other words, the caring voice of a middle-aged African-American woman. Lastly, they recommended having group chat rooms to connect with other users and the ability to connect with therapists through the app via messaging or video call. So for example, regarding a feature to track anxiety, a participant voice, she would like, if you could have a history in there, and then you can look back and see when the last time was that you had this anxiety and what helped when you had this anxiety attack or whatever. You don't just end it with what you see. You can write it down, what helped, and then you can go back to that. So participants voiced that they would be more likely to use the app regularly if they found value in it, and the app was easy to use. Specifically, participants emphasized the importance of feeling a sense of community when using the app, being able to connect with a therapist, and managing anxiety and depression through learning coping skills. The user interface should also be clean, and the app must be intuitive and easy to use. Having an accountability feature was also recommended, such as a daily mood check-in. Gamification of the app was suggested to give the user a sense of accomplishment and make the app more sticky. Participants voiced that if the app is too cumbersome, there are too many notifications, or if the exercises take too long to complete, it would discourage use of the app. Overall, the focus group participants were excited about the idea of an app tailored to help them manage anxiety and depression. So for example, regarding providing some type of incentive to use the app, one participant stated, although it would be a superficial incentive, I feel just like apps that keep track or give you stars or anything that I guess signifies that you've completed something in itself can be validating to people, especially good habit building and stuff like that. So most of the participant concerns were about security and privacy. There was concern that the app could be hacked and their data disclosed. Furthermore, participants had apprehension about who would own the app and their data sharing policies. There have been many data breaches in the news which concerned participants, and they were also aware that many apps sell user data. The primary concern was that the data would be used to harm them personally or Black women in general. So for example, regarding data sharing and use, a participant voiced her concerns stating, I was watching the news on the treadmill last night, 2 nights ago, and they were talking about how these big companies on these dating apps are selling data. And so I would be worried about who has control over the data that's happening in the app and what are they going to do with it now that they have all this information about Black women. So following the focus groups, I held usability testing sessions to evaluate the initial prototype of the app. And many of the recommendations from the focus groups were included in the initial prototype used for usability testing. So I worked with a team of undergraduate computer science students at UNC on development of the prototype. And here's displayed a screenshot of the app home screen. So the app contained features such as a guided thought journal, information about anxiety and depression, including facts about the prevalence of anxiety and depression among African American women, self-assessments for anxiety and depression using questions from the Patient Health Questionnaire, the PHQ-9, and General Anxiety Disorder, GAD-7 scale. It also had a mood rating feature and graphs to track trends in depression and anxiety severity, as well as it had resources such as links to the Therapy for Black Girls Therapist Directory and podcasts, and a self-care planner. So additional recommendations from the focus groups will be included in the next version of the app. So for usability testing, individual sessions were held for each participant in the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill School of Nursing Biobehavioral Lab. Women 18 years or older who identified as Black, African American, or multiracial were eligible to participate. Participants were recruited via posts on social media. Also, a recruitment listing was posted to Research for Me at UNC, and flyers posted on community boards at local coffee shops, county libraries, churches, and college and university campuses in the Durham and Chapel Hill areas. So for the usability testing, the cognitive walkthrough method was used to evaluate the user interface on how well it supported users in learning to complete tasks. Specifically, this method was used to evaluate the ease with which users can perform a task with little or no formal instruction or informal coaching. So participants were read the persona and scenario and then asked to begin the 4 tasks. They were also told to speak aloud their thoughts and actions. Excuse me, that's my doorbell ringing. Give me 1 second. Okay, I'll begin again, I'm sorry. They were also told to speak aloud their thoughts and actions so that it could be recorded by the Toby software. So in the background, the Toby software recorded video of the participant completing the task, including taps on the phone, eye movements, and the amount of time spent on each task. The questionnaire for user interface satisfaction was self-administered after the usability testing was complete to collect data on system performance and the most positive and most negative aspects of the app. So in order to limit participant burden while testing most of the features of the app, there were 2 different personas and scenarios with 4 tasks each. Participants were either given scenario 1 or scenario 2, and the activities included finding out the recorded levels of anxiety or depression for the past 6 weeks, finding information on how to manage anxiety or how to overcome depression, adding a new entry in the guided thought journal, creating a plan for self-care, and locating a therapist to schedule an appointment. So participants did not enter any personal information in the app, and the instructions for each task included dummy information for the participants to enter to complete the task. So descriptive statistics were calculated to better characterize the study participants and to measure user interface satisfaction. Means, standard deviation, and ranges for scores in each quiz domain were calculated. To measure efficiency, the mean, standard deviation, and range was calculated for time to complete each task and the number of taps required to complete each task. And then the Toby eye tracking software was used to create heat maps to reveal the focus of visual attention on the screens. And feedback from the cognitive walkthrough think aloud sessions were summarized. So just going over some characteristics of the participants, there were 15 participants that were in the usability testing sessions. And so they all completed the cognitive walkthrough think aloud, and participants ranged in age from 20 to 66 years old. with the mean age being 29.8. Once again, all identified as Black African American or multiracial. And furthermore, approximately 87% had obtained a bachelor's degree or higher. The majority of participants also indicated that they use mobile apps 4 or more times per day. So overall, the results of the usability testing show that participants were mostly satisfied with the user interface of the app. 8 participants that were given the task for scenario 1, the average mean score for each domain ranged from 7.2 to 8.3 on a scale of 0, indicating low satisfaction, to 9 being the highest satisfaction. And as you can see from this table, ease of learning to use the app and app capabilities received the highest scores with 8.0 and 8.3 respectively. So 7 participants were given the task for scenario 2. And so for the second scenario task, the average mean score for each domain ranged from 7.5 to 8.8. Most of the scores were 8 or higher, right? Most of the mean scores. And so the scores may have been higher for scenario 2 because it didn't include a journal entry, which had more steps to complete than the other tasks. So most participants were able to fully complete each task with limited to no assistance. As I stated before, the journal entry proved to be the most time-consuming and cumbersome task, and most participants took longer than expected. However, the differences in time to complete each task was primarily due to differences in typing speed or using an alternative method to search. For example, a participant may have used the link from the hamburger menu instead of tapping the feature icon, which was quicker. So the Tobii Pro 2 glasses were calibrated for each participant prior to beginning usability testing. And here's a video that shows the Tobii Pro glasses recording the eye movements of an individual and what they focus on as they navigate the app to complete tasks. So this information is useful in understanding users' behavior and can be used to inform the design of the app to make it more intuitive by knowing where they are more likely to look. As you can see from the heat map for the Managing Anxiety Tips screen, which is to the left side of your screen, participants spent most of their time focusing on the left and middle of the screen. These are the spots with greater intensity, where you see the red and orange areas, indicating that these are the areas of greater visual focus. Furthermore, some of the insights gleaned from the cognitive walkthrough sessions and heat map of the screens were that the app, once again, should be intuitive and easy to use. The interface should be visually appealing with clear labeling, and important information should be placed to the left or middle of the screen. And this is consistent with standard recommendation for designing apps. Also, previous research showed that people spend 80% of their time looking at the left side of the screen. So one of the main limitations of the focus groups was that most of the participants were under 50 years old. So the sample skewed towards capturing the thoughts and opinions of younger African-American women. So this may limit the generalizability of the findings to older African-American women. Also, given the stigma of mental illness in the African-American community, participants may have felt peer pressure to give socially desirable answers to the moderator's questions. In regards to usability testing, one limitation is that due to the geographical restriction in recruiting participants, the results may not reflect the opinions and perceptions of a nationally representative sample. Also, most of the participants were under 50 years old, so the sample skewed towards capturing the thoughts of a younger group of African-American women. In addition, personal preferences may have been revealed in the feedback, which may not be helpful in improving the usability of the app. Another limitation was that the study did not focus on the efficacy of the app to reduce anxiety and depressive symptoms, as this would have required a randomized control trial and significant resources to be done properly. But despite these limitations, the proposed study design yield useful data that will help researchers to understand the mental health needs of African-American women and provide a framework for designing a smartphone app to help this population to manage anxiety and depression. So the findings from the study were consistent with previous literature, which highlighted the need for educational, psychotherapy, and personal development components of mental health apps. However, the app should be tailored to address the specific needs and interests of African American women. I apologize, I think that's my doorbell again. Okay. However, the app should be tailored to address the specific needs and interests of African American women. Use of preferred resources and app features will help researchers and developers create apps that are both useful and sticky. The design preferences of the study participants confirm the importance of incorporating trust-centered design components when developing a mental health app. It is important to design health information technologies for stigma reduction and social support exchange. Incorporating the user-centered design requirements of intended users may help them to become more engaged and feel empowered, giving them a sense of ownership. And in conclusion, due to the high rates of smartphone ownership, there is a great opportunity, once again, to use this mobile technology. Currently, the world is being affected by the coronavirus, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the Black community is being disproportionately affected. Mental illness is the invisible pandemic occurring due to high anxiety, depression, and isolation. The use of digital mental health tools is on the rise. However, a one-size-fits-all approach to designing these mHealth interventions may lead to more options, but continued disparity in receiving mental health care. To increase the likelihood of adoption, mHealth interventions should be culturally tailored, and incorporating the recommendations from the participants and knowledge of their technology use behaviors may help to mitigate future intervention-generated inequalities. So I just want to go over some next steps that I'm planning for the future. So in the future, I plan to further develop and test the app. So informed by the recommendations from the past focus groups and the findings from the usability testing, I will continue working with developers to update the app. And then I plan to conduct focus groups with 20 African American women to receive feedback on the upgraded prototype. So based on the feedback from the focus groups, I will work with a team of developers and to basically iteratively refine the features and content of the prototype in order to create a minimum viable product for the app prior to usability testing. Next, I will conduct the usability testing with 8 African American women on the new prototype. And so I'll use some of the same methods as I used before, such as the cognitive walkthrough think aloud method and eye tracking technology to evaluate how well the interface supports users learning how to use the prototype. And the results of this usability testing will help to further refine the prototype prior to actually launching a pilot. And so that's what I hope to do within the next year or so, is to be in a position to have a prototype ready for a pilot. And so with the pilot, I'll conduct an 8-week pilot study to evaluate the smartphone app prototype with 80 African American women with moderate to severe anxiety or depression. And so surveys will be administered to evaluate the feasibility, acceptability, and estimate the effects of the mHealth intervention on anxiety and depressive symptoms. I'll also examine app usage patterns, and the findings from the pilot study will be used to further develop the app in preparation for a randomized control trial, which is much further in the future. So I want to take time to just acknowledge my dissertation committee, who provided great feedback on this study. Also, Dr. Megan Threads, Malvika Pillai, Mohammed Osama Ali, and Paul Mias for their support in conducting this research. CS for Social Good, who helped with app development, and my funding from the training grant, both at Carolina and Yale. So here are my selected references. And thank you so much for your time. I apologize for the interruptions with the doorbell. And I'd be happy to answer any questions at this time.
Great, thank you so much, Terika. We'll open up to questions from the audience.
I have a question.
Yes.
Did you identify any stigma related? I mean, usually during conversation, you can, especially if you're doing a thematic coding, you probably identify some stigma that kind of comes out, and the nature of the stigma that African American women have about mental illness. Did you have any opportunity to identify them?
Yes, absolutely. So that was one of the things that we covered in the focus groups. I didn't present it here because I focused mainly on the app design, but we talked about the stigma among Black women and within the Black community in general. And so we found that the younger women, there was much less stigma regarding, receiving mental health services. And so when they talked about it, they spoke freely about their past, mental health conditions, what they used to cope, all of those things. But with the with the older African American women, they were more likely to basically talk about how they could get help for a family member or loved one. They weren't as free to talk about their own anxiety or depression. So there was still some stigma even within the focus groups, and it was acknowledged by both the younger and older African American women that there was stigma with the older generation. But as one of the older women said, we have faith the younger generation, they're vocal about it. They're actually helping to reduce the stigma by normalizing it. And so that was seen within the focus groups.
That's actually after the question, do they feel that mental illness is very specific to the culture and is tied to it, and therefore it's a little bit more deeply ingrained in the cultural aspect, cultural religious aspect, rather than just what you hear, because sometimes very different cultural aspects, they kind of feel that it's a mental illness, you shouldn't talk about it, you shouldn't discuss it. People will view you as less than perfect. And particularly, this is people who are prone to that are people of different races rather than, or colored people particularly, people from different cultural. So I'm just wondering if there was anything like, I really don't want to talk about it, or this is something I think I can handle it myself. Something that's much more hidden, that's not as expressible by the nature of the question. So I'm not sure, but I'm just asking a question.
Yeah, so they also talked about the need to have, I'm sure many have heard of the Superwoman Schema, that you have to kind of, grin and bear it, like you be resilient, right? Not show any weakness, and how that actually has been harmful to Black women. And so it is a cultural thing where it's like, okay, yes, I'm going through this, but it could be worse, right? Just pray about it, move on. Don't show any weakness, that type of thing. So we did talk about that in the focus group. That did come up, and how this resiliency, right, and trying to put on a strong front, keep carrying on to not only deal with whatever you're going through, but those of your family members or community members. So they've talked about that, right? You don't want to show any weakness. You don't want to be stigmatized and seen as not having faith, or not, being a good Christian by going to seek care outside of just praying about, whatever you're going through. If you're depressed, they say pray about it. But they basically talk too about how, you can do both. You can both pray and go see a therapist. It doesn't have to be one or the other. So talking about the stigma around it, and what we can do to normalize seeking mental health treatment, just as it's normal to go seek treatment for physical care was brought up in the conversations.
Thank you.
I have a question or a couple questions.
Yes.
First of all, thank you for your talk. It was great. I really appreciated learning about this. My question, so I'm a physician, so my background is coming from the clinical side where I know a lot of my colleagues struggle with finding, a lot of my Black women colleagues struggle with finding a balance between reaching out to Black women specifically for their care and just being in an area like they're not in the same communities as a lot of women who reach out to them through online methods. And I was just wondering, one, if you have plans to reach out to physicians to see their willingness to adopt these sorts of programs that patients seem to want. Because that's the other side of this, I guess, not physicians necessarily, but mental health professionals, social workers, et cetera. And then the other thing is navigating, I guess, are there plans to figure out how the patients seem to want, Black women to be involved in their healthcare, and that's kind of limited because a lot of Black women are kind of pushed out of healthcare for various reasons. And so if there's ways to address that lack of resource and how non-Black women can help with facilitating that sort of involvement.
Yes, absolutely. So for your first question, I absolutely plan to engage with mental health professionals to get them on board with, using the app, or I should say recommending it for their patients that they're seeing. But I think that starts with first having the pilot study, right, to prove that the app, the feasibility of the app, that, the satisfaction with the app, that we're actually seeing that is helping to reduce anxiety and depressive symptoms. So having that kind of proof before I go and say, and I would actually collaborate with some mental health professionals in the pilot study, but having the results of that study, then I could bring more on board and say, hey, this app has been proven to be, effective for this population. Not only do they enjoy it, but we're seeing, positive results. So starting there, so absolutely there's plans for that. And then the second part, I think you were asking about, due to the fact that there's not as many, Black women in, well, I think that the stat that I saw most recently, it was like less than 5% of, less than 5% Black women are psychologists, right? So when you have this need, they're saying, well, I want to speak to someone that looks like me, but you have the demand, but you don't have as many people available for them to see how can we facilitate, connecting them with resources, and how can we increase that? And so I think I've seen some initiatives now where they're actively trying to increase diversity in that field, and reaching out to people who are in high school and undergrad, and getting them interested so that we can actually build the workforce. But in the meantime, I feel like some of these technologies that we have, like making it easier to just have a curated list. That's one thing I appreciate about things like Therapy for Black Girls, where you can go and there's an entire directory that's already been curated for you. And you can say, based on, this zip code, I want to find a Black woman therapist, in my area. So making it easier for people. I mean, even myself, I've been having a tough time trying to find a Black woman therapist who also accepts my insurance, because as we talked about, cost is one of the biggest barriers. And even for those who have insurance, I found that the cost is still a barrier, because they said, I have insurance, but either they don't accept it, or the copay is it's too high. They're saying, I don't want to pay out of pocket for this, therapist that I would love to see. So trying to figure out how to get them access to, not just access to resources, but affordable resources is the key. Yeah.
And I guess a follow-up to that, did you find in your focus groups like what people would be willing to pay for, access to some of these services, like what copay is kind of too much? Obviously free is best, but
Right.
given that a lot of mental health care workers don't accept any insurance whatsoever, like what that threshold is and,
Yeah.
or if that
So
was discussed.
So we didn't discuss what would be, that would be a good question, a follow-up question for the next focus group, like what would be, what's the amount you'd be willing to pay, But we did talk about how some therapists have a sliding scale for those who, can't afford to pay the full price. But yeah, that would be a good question for follow-ups because we didn't go over what would be idea.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Hi, Dr. McCall. I have a question, but first off, I want to say thank you for your talk, and I really love hearing about work with end users, so it's really exciting. I am curious about kind of the long-term aspect of using an app like this, and if you've thought about how to promote reflection and also kind of documenting insights and reflection over time, and how we can help people kind of build up that personal resource with mHealth tools, either to supplement or to bring into, talk therapy, kind of more formal care.
Yes. So one thing that is already incorporated into the app is a guided thought journal. And so with that, they can go in, they can put in their entry, and then it kind of guides them, asks them like, what are some of the emotions that they felt around whatever they entered in. So if they were having a bad day, what are some of the emotions? And then they select from a list, some of the emotions that they felt. And then if they actually chose any of the negative emotions, it asks them, is there anything that they think they could have possibly done to, make the situation better or to avoid the situation in the future? So it kind of guides them in thinking about what are some of the things that I can do in the future to help me when I'm feeling this way, when I'm dealing with a situation. And then, if they say yes, then it guides them further to like document that. And if not, it has like an encouraging positive message. And so that's something that I hope that they can go back and reflect on. But ideally in the future, what I would love is for them to be able to take this app into their therapist, or if they're seeing a therapist virtually, to be able to share this information so that it can help to further tailor the treatment plan. Right. So that's idea, right? Where I would see it going in the future is to be able to take these patient reported outcomes and, even as they're documenting their emotions, they can, sometimes you forget, like when I met with my therapist, sometimes I'm like, oh yeah, that did happen. But to be able to have some kind of documentation so that I can actually sit with the therapist and talk to them about it, I can show them like, oh, this is how, my anxiety has been, right? So over the past 6 weeks, having that graph, that tracking graph where I can actually show them these type of things, I think would be helpful. So yes, absolutely. Thank you for that.
Really great. Thank you so much.
I have a question, Dr. McCall. First, thank you so much again for a wonderful presentation. I definitely think it helps to address a huge need out there. And as someone who also works in the space of health disparities, I'm right there with you. I have Adrian's question is a perfect segue to my question. So let's say that a patient is reporting very serious depression, maybe reporting in their journaling, suicidal ideation, something like that. Is there something related to the app maybe coming down the road or pre-existing that, your app might address, or, how would you handle this issue? Because potentially there is, some responsibility for the app, some might say, who knows? So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so right now, there's a disclaimer in there about if you're feeling any thoughts of suicide or self-harm, that type of thing, to contact the suicide hotline. That's that type of verbiage, right? And then also there's information about like how this app is basically not here to diagnose you, and it should not be the you know, this should be used in conjunction with actually seeing a professional, right? So this shouldn't take the place of a professional. But in the future, it would be great to have some type of, you know, something that incorporates, like it can flag stuff in text. Because right now, things like that depend on the person actually seeing, you know, reading that and saying, okay, yes, I'm going to call, you know, the suicide hotline. I'm going to reach out to get help. But having something that's more automatic, right, that can pick up even like in, you know, whatever they put into their journal entry and can kind of prompt them to seek care, or even maybe alert their therapist if they have one, would be great. So that's not something that's incorporated in the app, but would be something that I would be wanting to do in the future.
Thank you so much, Dr. McCall. This is such important and timely work. I had a quick question. I was struck by sort of the age differences in the people who did the usability testing with the app. I was curious, and the number of features that users highlighted would be useful to them. I was curious if there were any patterns that varied by age or other demographic characteristics that could help support different subpopulations within users for this tool.
Yeah, so as far as like features for the app, I think that the younger women, they were more so wanting more features that allowed them to be able to speak to each other. So they said, oh yeah, we should have chat rooms. That was something that the younger women brought up. Whereas the older women were saying, hey, we want to be able to find out where Black women are, you know, any events in the area. So it was more so they wanted the in-person connection, where the younger people were like, yeah, we would love to have chat rooms, right? So those were things that I was seeing that the, and for me to be expected, that the younger women were more likely to want, you know, the virtual options, right? And so, and then the other things that I saw is that for resources, it wasn't just a focus on mental health resources, because many times, like, you know, whether it be related to food insecurity or needing money to pay rent, like things that are financial actually cause, as we talked about in the focus group, where some of the biggest causes of anxiety and depression. So, so having tailored resources where the younger women were like, okay, financial aid resources, I need resources about, you know, like how to, you know, move forward in the future, dealing with imposter syndrome. These are things that the younger women were saying, we need resources around this. The older women were saying more so like support, like caretaking support, you know, things of that nature. So even when you're thinking about resources and curating those resources within the app, the needs are different for the younger versus the older women. Yeah.
Thank you. That's tremendously interesting. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Dr. McCall.
Oh,
I enjoyed your talk as well. One of the things you mentioned was, you know, this potentially being an app that could be used for patient-provider communication. I was wondering if you had thought about any integration approach, such as FHIR, for potentially sharing that data within the electronic health record, or do you feel like your users felt like they'd want maybe a little more control of it, and that type of integration wouldn't have been acceptable?
Yeah, I absolutely would love to do something like that. But what I'm finding out from some of my friends is a lot of these therapists they have private practices and they're not connected. So it's for me, it's like, okay, this would be great to use FHIR and integrate it into the EHR, but how do I get this information to their therapist if they're not connected to this major health system, right? So that's the conundrum I'm in now. Is like, how do I get it to the appropriate person? Because it's great for their physician to have it, but if they're actually seeing a mental health provider who's not connected, then how do I make that connection? So if there would be some type of dashboard that could be created that, you know, for the therapist to log in and be able to see, you know, what they're, you know, as the patient says, okay, I want to share my, you know, anxiety, severity trends and all that, be able to see that through the dashboard, that would be great. That might be actually the route to go, because right now everything is just kind of like fragmented. You know, everyone's not connected. And so I would have to see how in the future that would be a possibility to actually do some interoperability with using FHIR if it seems appropriate. Yes. You're welcome.
Hi, Lina Mamakina. Thank you so much for the wonderful talk. I have another question that maybe reflects some of the previous question and continues the theme that sort of just emerged. One thing I'm wondering about, I work with patient-facing technologies, but not in the context of mental health. And one of the things we're finding is that connection with healthcare professionals is sort of a double-edged sword. On one hand, it's a really wonderful thing to have for many patients. However, at the same time, it introduces potentially some additional hesitation to engage, to disclose information. We've seen this in the context of diabetes self-management. I imagine that it's even stronger in the mental health. How do you see this as a, have you seen this in your studies where your participants feel very open disclosing a lot of the information to their therapists, or do you feel that this may create kind of a tension? And how do you think this tension could be addressed in future technologies?
Yes, so I will say that within the group, the younger women were, I think there was maybe a couple of the older women that said that they had seen a therapist in the past. Most of the younger women said they had seen a mental health professional in the past, and they were pretty open just in the focus groups with sharing their experience, what they've been through and all of that, and being open about, you know, talking to their therapist and how much they love talking to their therapist, right? So I feel like as long as that relationship is there and they feel, you know, that they can trust their therapist and it's open, they can pick and choose what they can share in the app with the therapist. I want to be able to give them the option for that, right? Because there's some things they might put in the journal that they might say, I don't want to disclose this, right? But I think that there will be more apprehension from the older women. And honestly, I would have to think about that more. Like that would be a question to ask in another focus group in you know, as I think about future research studies about what are, you know, what would be some of the barriers to communicating or sharing some of the information in the app with your therapist, right? And how much would you be willing to share, you know, what types of information? So that's something for that I'll think about in the future about asking, but I don't quite have an answer as to how we can overcome that for the older African-American women just yet. Thank you.
Right, thank you.
Again, thank you for such a great talk. I was wondering, it's, you know, in important year in which you're doing this work, I guess to phrase it. You know, and interesting that you started it. I think the data you presented was pre-COVID. Have
Yes.
you considered if and how you might incorporate, you know, an understanding of perhaps impacts of COVID to, you know, this population, and how that perhaps could even change some design components?
Yes, absolutely. So as I think about, like, you know, how COVID has kind of pushed us all into, you know, doing, you know, telemedicine, right? So trying to do as many appointments as possible. Like I know even my therapist, she moved virtual. Most of my friends said they're virtual who are therapists. And so I think that doing some assessment now post-COVID to find out, you know, are the needs still the same? What are the barriers now? Because anecdotally, I can say that people who I talked to in the past about using app that seemed a little apprehensive now that they've used some type of either web-based or native app to communicate with their doctor, they're more open now, right? Because they say, oh yeah, at first I wasn't too sure, but now I just had an appointment with, my doctor, and it was perfectly fine. So I see that there's more acceptance now, just because this has been basically taken off and it is becoming more of the norm now due to the social distancing restrictions. So I think that in the future, just, and I'm sorry, can you repeat just the last part of your question? Because I want to make sure that I addressed it.
I guess it's it depends on exactly how your pre-data was collected, right? But will there be opportunity to kind of compare some of the data, or are you planning on asking explicitly about some of the impacts of COVID, or analyzing your data to see, if there were some impacts perhaps on design?
Yeah, so I would ask, now that we're, still within dealing with COVID, like what are some of the issues now? And as far as design, what are some of the features and content that would be needed? So absolutely. I can't really do like a pre and post with the same group because of the way that the survey data was collected, where we, so I had a survey and I talked a little bit at the beginning where it was anonymous. And then with the focus groups, all of that was based at UNC. But I would definitely do another study just assessing to see if there's any differences now that, COVID has happened. And so what I'm expecting to see is that there's more acceptance, but what are the needs now, right? That I don't know yet. And so that would be interesting to find out. Yeah.
Great, well, thank you. Any final questions? This was a great discussion, and thank you so much for presenting and sharing with us.
Thank you so much. Once again, I apologize for the doorbells going. I'm not expecting any packages, but I'm just
no
like,
worries.
Okay.
all in appropriate Zoom interruptions.
Thank you everyone for your time.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.